Parks, trails, programs. Recreation is everywhere but often goes unnoticed. Let's explore what's really happening. This is Recreation Matters. Most people interact with recreation services almost every day and almost never think about them. A playground on the way to work, a youth sports league after school, a walking trail behind a neighborhood, a fitness class at a community center. These things feel ordinary, almost like background noise, and that's exactly why recreation is so hard to see. In this video, I want to talk about why recreation is everywhere in American life, and why, despite its reach and impact, it remains largely invisible in public conversations. Not invisible because it doesn't matter, invisible because it works quietly. I'm approaching this from the perspective of a recreation scholar with over 20 years in the field, drawing on research, practice, and policy, not to advocate for a specific organization or system, but to understand what recreation actually does in everyday life. When people think about recreation, they often think of it as optional. Nice to have, but not essential. Parks are amenities. Programs are extras. Recreation is what communities do after the important things, like schools, roads, or healthcare, are taken care of. And that assumption makes sense. Recreation is associated with leisure, play, and enjoyment. And culturally, we tend to separate those things from seriousness or necessity. But that framing turns out to be deeply misleading. When researchers study recreation, not casually, but over years and across populations, they don't find extras. They find a form of social infrastructure. Recreation consistently shows measurable effects on physical health, mental health, economic development, social cohesion, healthy aging, and even community resilience. For example, long-term studies link access to parks and recreation facilities to increased physical activity and reduced chronic disease risk. Other research shows that structured recreation programs, especially for youth, are associated with improved academic outcomes, reduced risky behavior, and stronger social skills. And among older adults, recreation participation is associated with reduced isolation, better mobility, longer independent living, and lower risk of cognitive decline, including some forms of dementia. Just living near parks increases the likelihood that a person meets recommended physical activity guidelines, effects that translate into lower heart rates, lower blood pressure, and a reduced risk of stroke, especially in parks that are activated with programs and proper equipment. And the effects don't stop at individual behavior. Park resources can mitigate climate, air, and even water pollution impacts on public health. These outcomes aren't accidental. They emerge when recreation is designed intentionally, funded consistently, and integrated into communities. What's striking is not that recreation has these effects, but how rarely we talk about them in these terms. You can see this play out across sectors. In public recreation, a community center might serve as a de facto health hub, offering fitness classes, social programming, and safe spaces that prevent far more costly interventions later. In the nonprofit world, recreation-based programs often act as gateways, connecting young people to mentors, educational support, and stable routines. In private recreation, camps, leagues, and fitness organizations shape lifelong habits, social networks, and identity, often in ways families don't fully recognize until years later. Different structures, different funding models, but similar outcomes. Recreation shows up wherever people gather, move, play, and connect. So if recreation is this impactful, why is it so invisible? Part of the reason is success. When recreation works, problems don't happen. Crime doesn't spike. Health outcomes don't deteriorate as quickly. Social isolation doesn't become as severe. And prevention rarely gets credit, especially when it works quietly. As Dan Heath argues in Upstream, we're often trapped by a kind of problem blindness where we treat the absence of a crisis not as a success to be sustained, but as a reason to look away. Another reason is fragmentation. Recreation is spread across public agencies, nonprofits, private providers, and informal spaces. There's no single system to point to say, that's recreation. And finally, recreation often lacks the language of power. It's described in terms of enjoyment rather than outcomes, participation rather than impact. That makes it easy to undervalue, and even easier to cut. When you zoom out, recreation functions as connective tissue. It links health to education. It links individual well-being to community life. It supports systems that are far more expensive to repair once they fail. Recreation doesn't replace healthcare, it doesn't replace schools, and it doesn't replace social services, but it quietly supports all of them. And when recreation disappears, the absence is felt everywhere, just not always immediately. The reason recreation is almost invisible isn't because it's unimportant, it's because it's embedded. It's woven into daily routines, public spaces, and community life so thoroughly that we stop seeing it as infrastructure at all. So the next time you walk through a park, attend a program, or pass a recreation facility, it's worth remembering. You're not just looking at an activity, you're witnessing one of the systems that makes everyday life work. This is Recreation Matters. If you liked what you saw here today, please hit the like button to help this video reach more people, and subscribe to the channel to join us as we explore how recreation works, where it's overlooked, and why it matters.